Awesome. Well, welcome everybody tonight. This is our third week of foundation for Isaiah, and we're going to cover keys to understanding Isaiah tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. Next week we've got one more foundational class, and we're going to talk about the historical context of Isaiah, and then the following week we're going to jump into Isaiah 1. So if anyone wants to start preparing and getting on chapter 1, you guys can do that. Any housekeeping things to go over before we?
No, we will keep platform things. Updates are coming, especially when we get into Isaiah, the chapters, and we will send emails helping people to know how to navigate that. So yeah, so far it's all good. We have answered most, if not all, of the messages. So yeah, all good.
I'll say if you guys haven't delved into the website yet, those of you that have registered for the class, you'll want to take a look at that, especially as we start getting into the content, because Rodolfo has done some cool stuff where you can toggle between a few different resources that, it's kind of putting at your fingertips. So there'll be some good stuff and good discussion opportunity there.
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay. You want to pull up slides and get jammed?
Yeah, and so any rules on the chat? So we have already people making some comments, right? So if we can keep an eye, but the question that we asked today is really your experience with Isaiah, and then what tools have helped you. And there is a misspell there for tools, so ignore that. But people are mentioning Isaiah made simple, code words, types, and anyway, so we have a couple of, we're gonna go over some of the comments as we move on. So if you can guys keep an eye on that, that would be very helpful. So let's jump in. Okay, so this week we are covering the keys to understanding Isaiah, and I have this image here, and at first glance maybe doesn't have much of a meaning, and that's a little blurry too, and you don't know what it is, right? From far away you can say something maybe related to I don't know, something very abstract. But then this is the principle of tapestry. When you zoom out, then you can start seeing how beautiful these patterns are and how you can put things together. We have talked about this principle that Cameron expound for the last 2 weeks of the mountain, and have that great views on the top, how all things come together. And the tools that we're gonna cover today, I think also play into that. The more you apply these tools here and there, and it's like an exercise, the more you do them, then the better you can start seeing the big picture. And then you can zoom in here, or you can have the high level view, and things really start making sense. So anything before starting, guys, on the slides?
I'll say what's kind of cool about what we're doing here is with each week, we're starting kind of higher, a little bit more abstract and theoretical. Like the first week, we talked about the nature of prophecy in general and truth and how those things sort of fit together. And then we got down more specifically into the prophets and Isaiah, kind of his overall message and some important things to keep in mind. And so we're getting a little bit closer and closer to the text until a couple weeks from now, we'll get right into it and start going through. So this week, we'll go through some tools that are really important for sort of starting to analyze and pick it apart on a little bit more of the ground level. So we'll kind of do a little bit of bridging the gap between the big picture and then like, how does that actually apply? So it'll get more concrete this week as we go, and I think it'll be really exciting. I'll keep an eye on the chat as we go through here.
Yeah, if we can maybe have a break here and there, and then mention some of the comments. And
yeah, I can do that. Okay.
the people. Yeah.
Rachel, did you have anything?
No, that's it. Go for it.
Okay, so maybe our first topic will be what Nephi said about the manner of prophesying among the Jews, of the Jews. And this is from 2 Nephi 25. And let's read it. So Nephi said, now I, Nephi, do speak somewhat concerning the words which I have written. Now Nephi is speaking here in the context of the big block of Isaiah, from Isaiah chapter 12 to Isaiah chapter, sorry, 2 Nephi 12 to 24. And now he's not tell us what he wrote about, which is what is this, why he's using the words of Isaiah and in this context. Anyway, so he says, which have been spoken by the mouth of Isaiah, for behold, Isaiah spake many things which were hard for many of my people to understand, for they know not concerning the manner of prophesying among the Jews. So I want to highlight one key element here, that he is mentioning the concerning the manner of prophesying among the Jews, and that's going to be different than the manner specifically the manner of the Jews. And this is the next verse. For I, Nephi, have not taught them many things concerning the manner of the Jews, for their works were works of darkness, and their doings were doings of abominations. So you have a distinction between the manner of prophesying among the Jews and then the manner of the Jews. And to me, the biggest takeaway is that we have the words of the prophets, which they spoke against actually the works of the Jews. So the manner of the Jews was related to the works of the Jews, particularly back then, and even today, they have what is called the oral tradition, and the oral tradition became the law. And Jesus in Matthew chapter 15 spoke against the oral tradition in a way that sometimes you lose the intent of the law, or you miss the mark, as Jacob mentioned. And so the works of darkness, that's a parallel reference to dead works. So meaning that these are the performance that we make that don't produce the light and truth we spoke before. The opposite of work of darkness in the book of Isaiah is righteousness, which that is that alignment of intention with God. So we are doing things for the right reason, and that produces that fruit of righteousness that the Lord expects. So that's what Nephi is really speaking about here, that he didn't taught them because their works were works of darkness. And this was much of that was the culture. The oral tradition was the culture of the Jews. And even back then, at the time of we see the Reformation of King Josiah, where the Jews became very orthodox in their traditions and their beliefs. However, Nephi understood that to understand the manner of prophesying among the Jews, then verse 6, you need to understand some of the cultural aspect of it. So not necessarily living the way that they lived, but also understand what was their lifestyle and culture, because that's what the prophets are speaking against. And so Nephi said, but behold, I, Nephi, have not taught my children after the manner of the Jews, but behold, I of myself have dwelt at Jerusalem, wherefore I know concerning the regions round about. So in other words, what Nephi is saying here is that the manner of prophesying of the Jews have to do with what the Jewish people were familiar with, and similar with the metaphors of Jesus, that he spoke on things they were familiar with, but also they had a higher meaning. So it's not just talking about places more than spiritual categories and so forth. We're going to cover some of that as we move forward. So any thoughts?
No, that was good.
Actually, sometimes I have a hard time explaining this concept that I wrote an article about this, but yeah, so the schema of Jewish culture and tradition works. That's the works, the manner of the Jewish, but the prophesying, the manner of prophesying is important to know. And I think this is the distinction between, sometimes people think, oh, you guys are trying to get into the manner of the Jews, and if I spoke again, so that is it's a negative thing, or you're looking beyond the mark and so forth. we're not doing that more than understanding the context, the culture, to make sense how those things that apply in the past can convey meaning for the future or for our own lives and so forth. So if we have to define Isaiah in a phrase, what are the words of Isaiah? And this is what the Lord said in 35:20. And these chapters are pretty amazing, especially like 16, 20, and 21. If you read them in context, it's all about Isaiah. And the Lord summarized the words of Isaiah in these two verses. And he said, yeah, remember, I spake unto you and said that when the words of Isaiah should be fulfilled. So this is the fulfillment of the words of Isaiah. Before they are written, you have them before you, therefore search them. So you have there a commandment. And verily, verily, I say unto you that when they should be fulfilled, then is the fulfilling of the covenant which the Father had made unto his people, O house of Israel. So you can put an equal sign there, right? Words of Isaiah equal to the fulfillment of the covenant with the house of Israel. So that's everything in the book of Isaiah has to do with the covenant of the Lord. So we have that is a good paper I read a couple of years ago, which is called Covenant as Context for the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah begins with technically a covenant lawsuit. So the prophets in this context in the Old Testament were covenant enforcers. Is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they came to remind people of covenant breaking. And that they understood that was really the role of the prophets, especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so forth. And then we have that's the context of the first 5 chapters of Isaiah, which then transform into the other covenants. And I have some reference here. So from Isaiah 49, we see
And
that,
so
yeah,
Rodolfo, maybe real quickly, it's good to note, just from a timeline standpoint, for those of you that aren't familiar, and I'm sure a lot of you are, Isaiah's sitting in the 700 BCs, give or take. And so if you put that kind of in the timeline, it's about 100 or so years before the Book of Mormon starts. And in Israel's history, this is starting to get towards the end, kind of the maybe golden age, you might say. There's definitely, as a civilization, things are starting to sunset, right? And they're getting wicked, and they're starting to practice idolatry, and they're letting all sorts of foreign influences corrupt their identity. And so you've got a host of prophets that are coming along, basically saying, to Rodolfo's point, the Lord sees that you guys have broken the covenant that you made with him, and as a result, you're going to be destroyed and scattered. But even within that, the Lord will remember the promise that he made to your father Abraham, that through him and his posterity, the world's going to be blessed. So even though you guys essentially are kind of incurring this curse on you right now, there is hope for a future generation, at which point all of these pieces are going to be put back together. So maybe just real quick as some context. I think that's good for kind of understanding, like, what is the immediate sort of context of Isaiah's day.
Yeah, they knew exactly they came at the edge of their world, right? The world was sending for them. And so they were looking forward, well, the warnings of covenant breaking and now what is coming, but then always looking forward to that these covenants that the Lord made with the fathers, he is going to fulfill them. And then it's going to be eventually a literal restoration. And we see some of this happening back again with King Cyrus, people return, but they were actually always looking at the Davidic covenant, because if you read where the Davidic covenant is in 2 Samuel chapter 7, the Lord said that to David, that eventually it's going to be they're going to be planted in a place and move no more. So that's the ultimate fulfillment. So every time they haven't moved, then that means the covenant has not been fulfilled, and its fullness. So anyway, so here are some references. And Isaiah 49, we see that the Lord sends a person actually to represent the covenant, to the people. This is, we call his servant in the end time. So this is from Isaiah 49:8. In the time of favor, I will answer you, and in the day of salvation, I will help you, and I will keep you and appoint you to be a covenant for the people to restore the land. So covenant here associating with restoration. This is Isaiah 54:10. Though the mountains might be removed and the hills might be shaken, my loving devotion will not depart from you, and my covenant of peace will not be broken, said the Lord, who has compassion on you. And this is in the context of Isaiah 48 mentioned that if people will keep the commandments, the peace would be like the river. But then, because most of them they didn't, so then they have this metaphor of chaos, and river becomes actually a deluge or something that overflows for the destruction. However, always we see the promise that the Lord for his people, that is that covenant that he cannot broken. And then this is in Isaiah 55, verse 3, which is the idea of the Davidic covenant. Incline your ear and come to me, listen, so that your soul might live. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my loving devotion promise to David. That is from that, making the allusion to the Davidic covenant, which we're going to cover. That is so embedded in most of the chapters in the book of Isaiah. Okay, so that's one key. Look at things as there is a covenant theology and background, and almost everything that Isaiah is expounding and the words of Isaiah are the fulfilling of this covenant that he made with the house of Israel.
So, and what you're saying, Rodolfo, maybe just to put an exclamation point on it, is all of these prophecies get fulfilled in their fullest sense because in the end time, because the idea is that these are all being made sort of as the distant promises that the Lord is reiterating, saying, look, you guys are being scattered now, and in large part, Israel is still right in a scattered and kind of disorganized condition. But the Lord is saying, I will reverse all of this so that eventually you will be made, the head of the nations, and you guys will be everything that I wanted you to be for the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the covenants made with the fathers are so important, right? We don't talk much about, when we talk about covenants today in our culture, it's always about personal covenants, but the covenants that the scriptures always refer are the covenants, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, and then the Davidic covenant. So, and then the new covenant, which is going to be that all of that coming together, like you're mentioning. So, and these are the promises that probably the Elijah is going to plant in the hearts of the children. That are the covenants the Lord made to the fathers, which are those three covenants, and they all come together in a wonderful fashion. The whole book of Isaiah is how these covenants come to place and so forth. So these are
maybe
please.
we can just mention that as we go through the chapters, we'll talk more about covenant language so that people know what to look for when a covenant is described and what words refer to that. And
there's a whole theology. Yeah, for sure. And Rachel, you want to cover some of these? These are the themes, parallel themes in Isaiah. I don't know if you want to chime in here.
Sure. So, well, these are 7, correct?
Yeah,
these
7.
are so interesting. Okay, you can divide the books into these by chapters like this, and they go together. So, Ruin and Rebirth is chapter 1 through 5, which parallels 34 and 35. And then we have rebellion and compliance, punishment and deliverance, humiliation and exaltation, suffering and salvation, disloyalty and loyalty, disinheritance and inheritance. So the other thing that's really interesting, so you can divide those up like almost like it's 2 halves of a book, right? They're not exactly even in content, but the ideas and themes go together. But then also the ruin and rebirth can parallel with the very bottom one, which is disinheritance and inheritance, and then coming together where you see humiliation and exaltation in the middle. So it's also like a chiasm there. So it's really interesting. And there's more ways of dividing up the the text and all the different chapters, but this is one that we've studied and I've really enjoyed and super fun.
And so
Yeah,
that's all to say, like from beginning to end, the way that Isaiah is sort of formatted from chapter 1 to chapter 66, like the way the content flows, as you put it, Rachel, is like very intentional. It's not like it, is sort of just jumbled together. It's like it's written almost symphonically.
yeah. It's not,
Yeah, I had no idea till I've read Abraham's literary message of Isaiah, and then you see it so
yeah.
it is like just it's a masterpiece. You have no idea when you look at the scriptures like that, thinking how planned and orchestrated everything is, but it really, really is.
It's not necessarily complicated more than sophisticated. That is it's beauty and yeah, when you start seeing it, then it's very hard to unsee it. And one thing that all of these different parallel themes are in the context of covenant. So uh, the Lord is going to fulfill his covenant, and then it's up to the people, right, where they want to end. And then you see what Nephi said, and in the context of his vision, and then introducing Isaiah and First Nephi 14 verse 7, that the great marvelous work is going to be for one hand or the other. We call that the doctrine of two ways. But the whole marvelous work is going to be to put people on one side or the other, and these are the sides that Isaiah showing you. And that's why you see that from a chapter level, but then also from chapters, right? All of these themes, they parallel. There is so much beauty in that, but also in every chapter, you see this alternation between hope and promises, and then warnings and destruction. So Isaiah does a good job alternating those on a chapter level, but then also on the different chapters, as we're gonna see in a second. But
There are a couple of questions here real quickly. Jolene asked what Bible is being used. She said the verses don't match the KJV. We'll use a few different versions as we go through, but I think most of what's in here tonight is going to be from the Isaiah Institute translation.
we use Isaiah Institute and also the BSB or Berean Standard Bible, and we will show different translations for just you guys to see the different options. And we're gonna cover why we are not using the King James version, which is very. I love the King James Bible, but we're gonna see why there's some maybe how do you say, limitations?
Shortcomings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
limitations to
Yep.
really understand specifically Isaiah, because we're gonna talk about parallelism and Hebrew poetry. So that's why. If you go to Isaiah explain.com, you can see this structure, and also you can see the Isaiah translation there. So
Compared to the KJV too, even so.
compared to the KJV, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
One other question, Pierre said, does this covenant not apply to our day, the current covenant people of the Lord, America? And I'll just say, let's put a pin in that because we'll certainly get back to that. So hold that question because there's a lot to say about that.
Yeah. Well, there is one verse. Well, let's not jump there. Yeah.
You can't help yourself.
No, I cannot help. That is, yeah. Let's move on. So, yeah, good question though. And then we talked about this last week, but also another literary key is to understand that what has been shall be, and that there is two time frames that Isaiah spoke, and he spoke to the house of Israel in the past, and then in Nephi 23 he mentioned that he also must speak to the Gentiles, because all things, this is Nephi 23 verse 3, that he spake have been and shall be according to the words which he spake. So that is an end time. So all the words, and I like that exclamation there from the Lord, saying that all things, not just some chapters, all things he spake has been and shall be. Now, there is a future fulfillment. And this is very important because Christ here is already resurrected. So when you start thinking a lot of the verses that Matthew is quoting about Jesus from Isaiah, like Isaiah 7, like the virgin shall give birth, right? A child and so forth. Although that we see Christ as the archetype, and we covered this in the previous lessons. Christ is saying that all of that is still yet to be future. So even though he's already went through his mortal life, there is a still future fulfillment of that, which is what Isaiah is actually pointing as a temporal end time fulfillment. Of course, comes from Christ, but just to give you a perspective of what he's saying, when is he saying that? And then this is Isaiah 46:10, that the Lord is saying through Isaiah that I declare the end from the beginning, and from ancient times what is still to come. And then Isaiah 44:7, who predicts what happens as I do, and is equal of me in appointing of people from old as types, foretelling things to come. So you see now the past becomes a type for the future, and actually people becomes types. So you see people, characters in the book of Isaiah, like King Hezekiah, Isaiah itself, King Ahaz, the king of Assyria, Eliakim, and so forth. They're types of end time people, but also we see the collective being also a type in the past for the future.
I would say once I started looking at types, that was a big game changer for me. I feel like all of a sudden instead of looking like at the specifics, you're looking at like a character role and what are the things that this person would do, or this nation or this group. And then all of a sudden you can see how that is applicable throughout time, and then maybe in an end time context too. So types are a huge, I don't know, huge contributor to having it make a little more sense. And I think they just kind of come along as you start to see them or have them pointed out even.
Maybe this transition to that, not just during Isaiah's time, because all of the book of Isaiah is an end time event, but also Isaiah uses even the past from his time as something that will repeat in the future. So then you can start reading the stories from the Old Testament that type and shadows of the always the prophets in the Old Testament, which are called actually the holy prophets. They always were foreshadowing the restoration of the house of Israel. And yeah, so then you're going to start seeing that we have, these are the 30 end time events from Isaiah prophecy that come. Abraham, Eliari has done an amazing job breaking those down. So you can go there and read them more. We will talk about them as we go through the chapters, but to give you that is this repetition of these events happening in the end time, and actually happened cyclical through the scriptures too. So you see, this is a pattern that repeats in the Book of Mormon, but then also will repeat in the latter days.
Yeah, and you might be looking at a lot of these right now and think, oh my gosh, that's like a lot of things that I'm not super familiar with, and this might seem complicated. But as you keep pushing through it, you'll find that you're actually familiar with a lot of these kind of motifs already, and a lot of things will kind of start clicking and coming together, and you won't feel like you have to memorize 30 different things because the stories will be so familiar to you. The other thing I was going to say, oh, I lost my train of thought. Maybe it'll come back to me.
It will come back. Sorry.
No, you're good.
You mentioned that it's not about really memorization, and I hope we don't approach Isaiah as something that you have to memorize like a chore. More than it's really a tool. The whole book is help you to be trained into thinking and patterns, thinking and types, and help your two side of the brains, right, to start processing information. And to me, that really opens the door for the Lord to give you more. And it's often your heart too, as you have to put the work to try to make sense. But it's not about checking. At least I know the 30 end time events. I know the 7-part structure, and now I know Isaiah. I don't think that's what the purpose of all of this is. So,
I remember what I was going to say.
please.
It fits with where we're going. So if this is new to you and maybe is a little bit unfamiliar, one way you can think about what we're saying or suggesting here is the way that we talk about the Book of Mormon being a book that's written for our day. We look at the stories, right, and we see them as being parallels to our day and to the end times. The reason the Book of Mormon is sort of written that way, or that style of writing, uh, you'll find as you get to know Isaiah that a lot of the Book of Mormon is based in the world of Isaiah. And they do things sort of in the prophetic style of Isaiah. So Isaiah is doing the exact same thing, right? He's kind of the original um, one to do that, to set that
The
sort of
template for
exactly.
everybody
Yeah,
else.
that's
Yeah.
the word I was looking for. Yeah. So same idea.
Rachel, you want to cover?
Oh, you want me to go? Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things we're going to look at tonight is just kind of briefly is talk about how Isaiah's writings are formatted or a template for them and how they work and how maybe apocalyptic writing works. So one of the structures is called a linear structure, and there's different ones throughout there, but this one will relate to it as like a historical timeline a little bit. And I'll just read this because it's easier for me. Okay, so a linear structure follows a chronological sequence of events, moving through history. This kind of structure presents Isaiah's prophecy as unfolding over long periods of time, much like a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. So one of these linear structures that we see has these three major phases or three parts, or you could call them three historical settings. And it's trouble at home, exile abroad, and happy homecoming. And each of these have to do with well, Israel's exile, but there's also other types of exile for an individual and a collective. But so the trouble at home is before they're exiled, and the people, like Cameron mentioned earlier, the setting for the beginning of Isaiah there is that the people are falling into corruption, there's injustice and idolatry happening. And so there's a prophet coming to warn them. Then they become exiled because they have not stayed within their covenant. And so they're scattered and taken to foreign lands, okay, or under captivity, whatever that looks like. Then once they return from exile, we call it happy homecoming. And there's other names for this too, but God restores them and brings them back to their homeland. And there's this period of renewal. And we find a lot of this in types like returning to the garden is what I kept noticing this week. And because land is a blessing, we see that as a fulfillment of that often. You guys have anything you want to add to that?
What's really interesting about this is basically the same pattern that any like three-act play or story will follow. There will usually be some kind of trouble at home, right? In the familiar world that the protagonist is, kind of knows. I mean, you can think of The Lion King, right? Perfect example. There's trouble at home, right? Scar is kind of plotting to do something, and there are things moving under the surface. There's exile abroad, so Simba's away and he's living with Timon and Pumbaa for a little bit, kind of in a scattered condition. He's not in the right place. He's been driven into the wilderness. And then there's a happy homecoming where everything comes back together and everything is restored to the way it's supposed to be. So when you start thinking in those terms, you'll be able to pick up on this in all sorts of stories and movies and shows that you guys are watching.
Awesome. And if you look at the Book of Mormon, you see a similar warning when it comes to the what they're looking for. The Book of Mormon writers really they care about the seed of Lehi, and they know that the Gentiles are a key role for them. So they're putting a lot of efforts to really tackle the Gentiles in the same framework. So you see that there is a warning about in Ether chapter 2, right? A decree upon the land in Second Nephi chapter 2:1 that there is this covenant on the land that the Lord will send other nations, and they are saying it because they know that this is what is prophesied that is going to happen. It happened to Israel. It will happen in the end time. But then you have the promises of returning and then receiving land of inheritance and all of that.
So you guys are going to hear the word exile a lot. This threefold pattern, again, those are the trouble at home, exile abroad, happy homecoming. It just is recurring constantly, like the guys just mentioned about. You'll see it in the Bible, you'll see it in movies, you'll see it in a book. It's just a plot that you come across all the time. And as you become more familiar, it is much easier to start noticing it. What is the next slide? I think we're going to talk about.
So somebody mentioned that so Diana mentioned that sometimes exile can be a form of deliverance, right? Rather than a punishment. And I would say yes. So there is a motif on First Nephi 8 of the great and spacious building, which is the same idea of the great abominable church or the whore of Babylon. And then usually the wilderness is the big construction of that system. And so you need to go to the wilderness because that represents, we're gonna talk more about that on of what the whole building and church represent. So then going to the wilderness become the construction and starting over, right? It's a journey now back to reality, to the garden and so forth. So
I read too in some, and I can't remember which apocryphal account, I could look it up, but when Joseph, whose wife is it? Is it Potiphar's wife? Whose wife is it that goes after him and pulls his garment from him?
the one you mentioned.
Yeah, when that happened, he had been praying. There was this storyline has lots more going on with it, and she's really after him, and he's praying for deliverance, and then he gets thrown in jail. And you could look at that; it's like an exile, but really the Lord also protected him by putting him in there. So it's kind of like, I agree with the comment that it could represent both good and bad.
Well, then section 88, the voice of the Lord is as one who call or speak.
Crying in the wilderness.
Crying in the wilderness. Exactly. He's calling you in the
Journey.
wilderness. And John the Baptist was, again, he was crying in the wilderness. And so, and all of that.
Good and hard. Time testing maybe, but yeah, also.
And I'll say, I mean, like in either scenario, it usually, I mean, it's always preceded by trouble at home in some form, whether it's like trouble at home because you're slaves in Egypt, or trouble at home because Jerusalem is getting really wicked and you're Lehi and you've got to flee. Usually some form of there's a disruption, right? So that there has to be an exile. So yeah, the patterns will play out kind of differently depending on who's going through them and what the context is, but you'll see as we kind of go along, these things come together in really interesting ways that is very much like a tapestry. So
that's the pattern of the Nephites. They always rise when they become the cycle of pride, and that's why the Lord said he brought the Lamanites so they can be a scourge to what is the word? Helping to remembrance, right? So
okay, so these are just a couple. These are a handful I pulled out of the scriptures really quick just to kind of show you guys. What time is it? Do we want to go through them?
you can just mention them.
Okay, so Adam and Eve, they're one that I thought was kind of interesting just to start with because they start off in the garden and through disobedience and partaking of the fruit, then they're cast out or exiled. And then they have to have this wilderness journey, right? Where they labor, they struggle, but they also, part of the kind of come to terms with who you are and figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And I had a hard time figuring out what their happy homecoming was actually. And you had the good idea of mentioning that, in the Valley of Adam on Adam. Where did we figure out where that was? Somewhere in D&C. I can't remember.
7. Yeah, Doctrine and Covenants 7.
I remember where it was.
107, yeah.
Yeah, 107. Sorry, 107.
Okay, so posterity is also part of posterity land. Those are both part of covenant blessings, and so you see that repeated over and over again. And a lot of these, there is fulfillment in the happy homecoming with a new covenant. So Noah is one also where humanity is totally corrupt and to the point where the Lord's ready to wipe everyone out and there's judgment coming, and so they're exiled into the ark in essence. And then their return is to the dry land and they make a new covenant with the Lord, and there's the sign of the rainbow or the bow in the sky. And then we have Jacob, who's like another great one. There's so many different things that could fit in here, so sorry that I just limited it. But some of his trouble at home, one example could be when he has some issues and rivalry with Esau, who wants to kill him, and so he has to flee to Haran. And then he experiences the same, hardship, judgment, deception, transformation, all kinds of things. And he's married, he has children, and then he returns to Canaan and he makes peace with his brother, he submits to God, and he receives, new identity, new covenant. So Joseph of Egypt's another one. His brothers sell him to slavery. There's trouble at home, so he's exiled into Egypt. And he, has the imprisonment. He has all kinds of trials there, and then he is reunited back with his family when he brings them into Egypt, and he's reconciled with them. So then Israel, specifically when they were in Egypt, is a great type of this because they were enslaved under hardship and needing to flee or be delivered. And so we have Moses, who acts as a deliverer, and they have to spend time in the wilderness doing the whole wandering and being tested, and then they return to the promised land. Well, the next generation of them receives a blessing of the promised land. So those are just a handful, but there's many more.
Yeah, in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, how Jeremiah calls those last days is they mentioned the day of Jacob's trouble. So people call sometimes tribulation, but I love the word trouble better. That that's going to be that day, right? Oh, that's the name of the day of the Lord. One of the names of the day of the Lord. So.
Well, and it's worth noting real fast. This is in a overarching cosmic sort of sense, the story of the plan of salvation, right? And there's a unique piece of restored Latter-day Saint doctrine here, and that is that there is a premortal life, right? There's a place that we come from. There was trouble at home. There's a war in heaven. And then we're in a state of exile right now, you might say. We're in the wilderness compared to where we were before. This isn't the way that things were. But through this experience, right, like we see with each of these characters or people that are fulfilling the pattern in their own unique way, we can ultimately have that happy homecoming where everything sort of comes together. So just to maybe underline that, this runs all the way through, everything that we do.
Yeah, that's the temple drama, right? That's what
Yep. Yeah, that's why Adam and Eve are the archetypes, the patterns that we follow.
So what we've been talking about is the hero's journey, and as Cameron was just kind of giving us that description, my favorite, most applicable story to this is the Hymn of the Pearl, or what else it's called? The Hymn of the Soul. So it's found in the Acts of Thomas, and it goes through this in such a beautiful way, and it parallels the exact story, Cameron, where it talks about him leaving his heavenly home, and his parents have sent him out down to, actually they say Egypt, down to Egypt, strangely. And he has to go through all these similar storyline of trials and errors and learning who he is, and in order for him to get the pearl, which may be similar to other things that are of great worth, and then return home. And he returns to this glory and light. It's a great story. Maybe I can send a link to it for you guys. But so the hero's journey, I'll just kind of hit these bullet points really quick. So this person, which is all of you, actually, each one of us really, is of royal origins and lineage. And because of political or other conflicts in his homeland, he has to leave and flees. And then, like we mentioned, there's this kind of wilderness journey during this period of darkness when they're expelled to a foreign land, a different culture. Even in the Pearl story, they talk about different food. It was really interesting. But that exile and expulsion out is actually the catalyst for this self-discovery. And which also I would say brings like this heightened awareness of who he is and what he's supposed to do, and he recognizes really what his role is and who he is. So within that, then there's this interesting desire and longing for home or to return home. And then there, it, concludes with this being welcomed home, kind of like the prodigal son's another example of this that fits this pattern. And, his parents' father welcomes him home and he's reinstated to the position even higher than when he left. And it's a great story. So you guys have anything you want to add to that?
No. When you mentioned Egypt, the Lord called Egypt in Exodus 20 the house of bondage. Egypt becomes an archetype of the house of bondage, and
It's in Isaiah, right?
yeah, and also Jacob mentioned the grave, like the spiritual temporal death, as the house as bondage too. The same idea of yeah, a place that we have to leave eventually for inheritance and that. But it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's just my favorite. If you're really into the hero's journey or you don't know much about it, Joseph Campbell has a bunch of books and he's dedicated many years to this pattern and talking about it in different ways. But another, like the Epic of Gilgamesh fits this. Homer's Odyssey, the Odysseus character fits this really well. Any of the great literature and great stories
Yeah.
fit the pattern.
And you see that when those movies probably are more memorable, right? And you see lately they're trying to change the archetype and without purpose sometimes, and they're losing there is something missing, right? So I think we have before we told these stories right through all of this type of media, and now lately we see that, I don't know, a distortion, right? And we lost that in some sense. So okay, so so yeah, so we want to talk about now is as context, and yeah, so this is just a fun illustration. So this is another key as the look at the micro and macro structures in Isaiah, because everything is linked together in a wonderful way. But you can see from a macro, right? The bigger, what Rachel is mentioning, that you have the idea of travel at home. Sorry, I have that image. I'm trying to not to laugh. And but then from Isaiah 1 to 39, they get in trouble because somebody mentioned in the comments like covenant breaking. So that's what really make people in trouble in the book of Isaiah. So now they're reborn in Isaiah 37 under tribulation. That's when we see the daughter of Zion being come to birth. And we see a similar idea in Revelation chapter 12. We see the woman in travail, right? Representing she brings, that's the church of the Lamb, and so forth. So they get into trouble, and now tribulation comes, and then Zion is born that way. And then from chapter 40 to 55, we see now another figure, right? King Cyrus, who is calling people to return. And he brings judgment to Babylon. He did that literally back then. But then we see gathering and restoration from 40 to 50 as a main motif of those chapters. And then from 56 to 66, we see the idea of universal salvation, and then judgment to the nations. But really, everybody else is technically invited, and you see the same eschatological doctrine and through the scriptures, where we see first Zion, the people are born. Section 45 mentions some of that, and then we see, and also 35 chapter 21 at the very end, that's mentioned that the Gentiles are going to assist the remnant to build a city, which is the New Jerusalem, which is Zion, and then all the people will, the remnants of the house of Israel will return. And after that, you see a similar idea in section 77, speaking of the book of Revelation, that when we see the 144,000, right? So you have Israel being coming together, being restored, and then 144,000, 12 from each tribe, and they're going to go out and invite as many as they want to come to the church of the firstborn. So you see that in the book of Isaiah, and yeah, it's beautiful plays out through the historical events, but also looking at as a shadow of the end time. So, and then you have other, so you have a macro, and then you start seeing microstructure. So you can cluster chapters. So 1 to 5 can be a unit, and then every cluster really contains the whole prophecy, and then expounds a little bit more in the next one. So you have this cyclical aspect of the same vision, 1 to 5, 6 to 12, and then 13 to 23, and so forth. So you see the linear, not necessarily progressive, but also complementary structure that you can start then making sense of things. So that's why there is so much repetition. And then on a chapter level, so the vertical, right? Here's the verses. You have the parallelism between two lines sometimes, and then I expound that through the chapters, and then we see chapters, sections, and so forth. So to put this together really is a masterpiece. And this is some of that linear microstructure.
I was going to say too, the reason why it matters that sometimes you need to read chapters within the unit that they belong is to help give you context to what is being discussed.
And that's this lab we are mentioning more than we like to take things out of context, right? And there is this rabbi that I like. I mentioned this, I think, to you guys before, that a lot of Christians go to Jerusalem, and they go with this sign saying that read to the Jews, read Isaiah 53, right? The suffering servant. And there is this rabbi who go and ask them, can you tell me what Isaiah 52 says? Or 54? And they have no idea, but they know chapter 53. And in our culture, I think we have some of our favorite chapters, right? 28. Everybody can quote chapter 28. Can you quote chapter 27? So when you start looking into context, you have a better foundation to understand what's happening, instead of just assuming because you can just quote one chapter and all of that. So that's a good point, Rachel. And yeah, these are the linear. We're going to cover them. I think looking into the chapter sections really help to locate where we are, right? And see that always looking at that big picture. And this is the synchronous structure that Isaiah mentioned. So we color code the chapters that go together. Again, we try to put together everything in one slide, so you can kind of see that high view of the book. And this is the 7-part structure that we mentioned before. So you see how they repeat, and Isaiah keep talking about the same themes over and over. So any thoughts?
I love a color-coded slide. That's awesome. Always helps me see everything better.
So I guess maybe to recap, the idea is that there's sort of the way that Isaiah is written is there are lots of things going on at the same time. You've got this kind of overall, linear structure that is telling sort of one big story, right? That's saying, okay, here's what's kind of wrong with Israel. This is the punishment that it's slated to receive. This is everything that's going to follow. And then here's what's going to happen next. Here's struggles and how eventually be gathered back together. And then kind of the fulfillment of the prophecies and the covenants and all of that, where it's a happy ending and everything comes together, right? You've got that going on. But then to go back to your other slide, this is where we were also getting into Isaiah also hits on several different themes as he's going, right? So all this to say, and I know some of this might seem like a lot at this point, and you'll kind of just have to, as you get into some of the chapters, I think you'll see it and just let it marinate a little bit. But all that to say, this is a very, very sophisticated, intricate, intentionally written message.
But not impossible.
Well, yeah. You can get sometimes those moments of I think I get it, right? Like your brain opens up, but it's like a three-dimensional, right, figure that you have to look at it from an actually higher dimension to see how everything is connecting. And that people who are using, I saw last year, VR technology to make sense of some of these, how these tied together in a way that, yeah, you cannot see it linear, but I think the purpose is just to help you to start thinking in a pattern oriented way, cyclical, and then the Lord can help you to start recognizing some of these truths and so forth.
Next
And yeah, this is
podcast.
mostly just meant to introduce you to the pieces at this point.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so don't feel like you see the slide one time and it's like, all right, you got it, because this is the last time we're talking about this and we're moving on. And if you don't have it, you're doomed. This is just introduction to all of the pieces that we're working with. It's the bottom of the mountain, right? And as we go forward, you'll see all of these things kind of start coming together and it'll click.
And I just want to say is every time I've looked over and prepared each week, I'm learning something new every time over and over and over again. So I don't, it never stops. None of us are sitting there at the top looking pretty with the 360-degree view. It's just a really fun climb.
You wanna read this, Rachel?
Okay. Okay, so these two structures, they don't actually contradict each other. Sometimes you will come across things where you think maybe they do, or you'll hear somebody say they do, but they actually really work together. And because you can find one and see the other, and there's, like I said, there's multiple, that's what helps you to unlock the message and to realize how it works. And so that linear structure shows how those events kind of unfold in like a timeline-y sort of way, but then the synchronous one, you could imagine it's placed on top of it. And that's what really, it makes it so that it shows that it's applicable to the end time. I'm trying to think how the best way to explain that is.
Yeah, and then, well, yeah, and you start, that is I don't know, I taught in Sunday school last year, and I used an example of, that is this thing that my dad gave me, this paper that has a lot of dots or like a very abstract shapes, and then you needed to look at it for a long time, and then there was like this three image start forming. I don't know if that is a technical name for this type of papers, and I was so fun because then after looking for like a minute, then I can start seeing like a figure of an animal, and I had a lot of fun watching that. And I think the more you pay attention to Isaiah, then you see that there is this synchronization, right, that start forming, and then it's so awesome to I cannot see it anymore, and all of that. So I don't know, that's an analogy that.
That's a good one.
Okay, so now the other key we are gonna cover, and we're gonna try to go fast on this one, and you can, guys, stop the slides to read most of the content here, but this is the why in the world we have. Okay, somebody mentioned, thank you, Debra, 3D Magic Eye. Look at it, it's so fun. I got some for my kids, and I think it's a wonderful principle of, seeing things that are unseen. But anyway, so why poetry and parallelism? And this is probably the one of the biggest tools that helped me to really enjoy actually reading Isaiah. Before was, at the beginning, was kind of painful, right? What am I reading? But then when you start understanding the structure and why actually they use poetry and parallelism, then it makes sense. So this is from Matthew 13, and this is the question the disciple asked the Savior, why did he spoke unto them in parables? And now, in that culture, we usually think parables are a way to simplify things or make them more relatable. And that's not what the Savior said, actually. He said that he answered, I say unto them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. And that is the same idea in 2 Nephi 28 verse 30, right? Line upon line, but then those who say we have enough, it shall be taken from them. But the purpose of a parable here, you see in this verse, therefore I speak unto them in parables, because they see and see not, and hear and they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, by hearing it shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing it shall see, and shall not perceive. So the purpose of the parable was really to look with spiritual eyes to the meaning of what Jesus was trying to say. So the kingdom of God is something like, so he used usually a metaphor. And the purpose of the metaphor was to conceal a greater reality. And so if you pay attention and you start thinking about it, okay, let me think about what Jesus just said and start making these connections, right? That is when you are giving the opportunity to open up for the Spirit to talk to you, because the Spirit by default is gonna speak into symbolism, or a language that maybe we're not familiar with when it comes to reason and logic. And that was the purpose of the parables, was a filter for people who want to pay attention and so forth. So, and then he quote Isaiah, which is this is from Isaiah chapter 6, and this is when Isaiah received his endowment of prophecy, right? And in the temple, and he sees the Lord, and then the Lord calls who is gonna go for us to speak to these people. And then Isaiah says, send me. And the Lord is gonna send Isaiah, but the Lord tells Isaiah to prophesy in a way that people, well, this is go and tell these people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the hearts of these people fat, deafen, that's the word, their ears, and close their eyes, otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. And of course, these are the spiritual eyes, the spiritual ears. So the whole idea is the prophecy of Isaiah is given in a way that is to put a test the people, is to see if they're going to harden their hearts, or they're going to awaken their spiritual senses. And then that process is going to help them to understand and in their hearts. And that's the healing that really the Lord want to offer. So I remember going to school and seeing this communication model. That is a technical name for this. But for the sake of the presentation, you see you have somebody who is the source of the message, and then you have the recipient. In this case, God is the source, and then you have the message, which is the word. The word is Christ. And then you have the messenger, which is the prophet. Now, the messenger is going to take the message and code it in a way. That's the encoding process. In this case, on Isaiah, we have poetry and parallelism. That becomes the code. And then you have, this is going to also become the filter for you to decode the message. And the only way, of course, is through the Spirit. But for you to really decode Isaiah's message, you have to confront poetry and parallelism. And you have other, so whatever is on the way of you to really see with clarity is what we call noise or distortion. And this can be tradition, precepts, disobedience. I think section 93 mentioned the Satan takes light and truth because of the tradition of their fathers and disobedience. So it's your lack of being trained into hearing the voice of the Lord and receiving light. So then Isaiah comes in a message, right, that if you don't want to put the work in it, then you're going to harden your heart, which is in Alma 12 actually is the default. People who don't give heed and diligence, by default, they are hardening their hearts. They don't inquire. They're not putting the spiritual work. And then there is also a feedback between the source and the recipient, and how do you know that the message really is getting through? And that's the spiritual progression that needs to happen. So if I read this only intellectually, then I'm not growing spiritually, then that is a problem with the purpose of the whole process. And that's the purpose of poetry and parallelism, more than studying it as something fun for you to just, I love poetry. Actually, the purpose is to help you to open your heart, open your mind to understand what the message is. Anything with that before? Okay, so this is a
Rodolfo, I have something. Can I say something real quick? That I realized
yeah.
that the way the KJV is laid out, just our Bible in general, it's not the parts that are poetic aren't written in a way that lends to seeing that. So, at least with when I first started reading Isaiah through the Isaiah Institute translation, it's written in a way where you can see it. I don't know how you describe that, but there's all, I mean, there is, and
I
there's
think we'll actually show. I think we'll show that in a couple of slides.
okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
I
we'll
think
show
we'll help with the
the
visual for what you're describing.
Helpful.
Yeah.
yeah, they have a visual for.
Okay, good. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Because you're right. This was, like Rachel mentioned, my experience before. I took a screenshot of my 2020 Book of Mormon, and reading through it, I have the goal. I want to go over the Book of Mormon one more time, and I got really conflicted by Isaiah. Like, I don't want to read this if it doesn't make any sense. But then I was just trying to. This is in Spanish, of course, and the purpose is just for illustration. I was trying to highlight what makes sense to me. But to me, the idea of repetition or language that was not really relatable, or people or places that were not relatable to me, okay, what am I reading? So and this is probably the most standard approach is that we have a mistranslated text and the King James Bible. We will talk about that next week, why that is mistranslations, and not that we're calling out anything more than, yeah, it is what it is. We have texts that sometimes they apply much of what is called Christology. They were trying to really fit and make sure King James was happy with the work. But then was written in a format that was not intended. So you have most of our scriptures, they write Isaiah in prose, and Isaiah is written in parallelism. And then it's heavy on metaphors, right, and figurative speech. And then at first glance, when I was reading it, was about a people that, to me, I don't know anything about Moab or Assyria or Aram or Syria. Who are these places, right? So I never really I always faced this cognitive dissonance. It was not like reading something else, which was very easy to read, more linear, and so forth. And then I realized over the time, I realized I have to break down Isaiah into lines, and then things start making more sense, actually. And then I learned later that actually that was the way it was written, which is called parallelism. And this is just to show you an example of how from the Masoretic text we have some of the Hebrew signs that people knew it was written in this way. Now, most of current translations, you're going to see that that's what we see as a format for some of the verses in Isaiah, most of the verses in Isaiah, and then how you can start putting things together, and you can contrast or you can expand according to the type of parallelism.
So that, just real quickly, is what Rachel was talking about when she says that the KJV, one of the reasons it's maybe a little bit harder to get the meaning out of it is because it's written in a prose style. I don't know, Rachel, was there anything else you wanted to say on that?
Oh, sorry, I hadn't seen this slide, so I wouldn't have even mentioned it if I had seen it.
No, you're good. I was
You're
figuring
good.
this captures exactly what you're talking about.
So you want to expand on what was helpful for you, Rachel?
Well, just exactly just how you have it color coded there and shows it, just all of a sudden the words pop out because you see them in parallel, or you see, just visually. I'm a visual learner. I love images. I love color. I like all of that. So the way that things are shown, it makes a big difference.
So, Cameron, can you read this? I get dyslexia. I have dyslexia when I'm in a
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is from Robert Alter, who's a biblical Hebrew scholar. If we could actually hear God talking, making his will manifest in words of the Hebrew language, what would he sound like? Since poetry is our best human model of intricately rich communication, not only solemn, weighty, and forceful, but also densely woven with complex internal connections, meanings, and implications, it makes sense that divine speech should be represented as poetry. Such speech is directed to the concrete situation of a historical audience, but the form of the speech exhibits the historical I can't talk here.
That terms.
Indeterminacy of the language of poetry, which helps explain why these discourses have touched the lives of millions of readers, far removed in time, space, and political predicament from the small groups of ancient Hebrews against whom Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and their confreres originally inveighed.
Yeah, that's from the book, The Art of Biblical Poetry. And I have a couple of notes in the next slides, but anything on this that stood out to you guys?
It's just the idea that poetry captures sort of the spiritual human experience, right? The way that we're using words kind of as an art form more than like a mathematical equation or something like that. It's descriptive and it's illustrative, and that's why we can read a story from 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and it can resonate with us, in a really deep way because at our core we're the same.
Yeah, and you have here on the right the these are the books are poetry works and the Hebrew Bible, and it's not all of them, but these are the ones who are before Isaiah, the book of Job and Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. So they were written and there were poetry, there were songs, there were written parallelism. So Jewish people were very familiar with this style. So then we have later that the prophets came, and they took that style to actually craft their prophecy. So you have Isaiah and Hosea and Micah and Amos, all of them contemporary. And then later Jeremiah comes with the same. Jeremiah has a mix in the book of Jeremiah between prophecy and parallelism and prose and parallelism. But then Lamentations is all about this show the emotions, right? That the poetry conveys. So I won't read all of this, but to give an idea that the same way that the metaphors were some type of a filter, uh, this is the same idea that the structure of a verse in Hebrew with parallelism and poetry also you have to put the work. And so these are notes from actually that I took from Alter's book. And Robert Alter, he has an amazing translation of the whole Hebrew Bible too. It's called the Alter translation, and an amazing commentary, highly recommended. But you have the Greco-Roman logic, which is our Western mindset, which is linear progression, and one person, right, is the one who's speaking, everybody else listening. And the King James version was the way that was written. So it compresses everything into one chunk of text. In contrast, we see that Hebrew poetry. Let's read some of these. So is semantically dense, pattern-oriented in tradition, where meaning is conveyed through structural parallelism, typology, recurrence, and metaphorical resonance. So that's why maybe when we read Isaiah, there is this cognitive dissonance, because we're so trained to think linear, and then we see that we're reading something that keeps repeating itself and doesn't make any sense. But when you start breaking it down and make these connections, then okay, I can see that my mind now is opening up to something more. Of course, it requires you to soften your heart and decide to really take on the commandment of search Isaiah diligently. And these are other points from notes that I took from Alter's book. And what I really, the takeaway mainly is that parallelism, imagery, and metaphor are spiritual teaching devices, tools that stretch the mind, soften the heart, elevate the soul. It's a drama usually that you need to put yourself in first person and start visualizing, and it helps your mind really to go to these places. And then let's see something that I like here. Parallelism trains the mind to think relationally and see how ideas build, mirror, contrast, and so forth. So you can go on through the slide, and at the end, I have a quote here from, oh, sorry, I cannot see with the Zoom panel. This is from Alter at the very last point. The poetic line is often a miniature enactment of the narrative process: repetition, tension, movement, resolution. So that's how sometimes these parallel lines really expound in everything else that we see in the book of Isaiah. Anyway, but then you can start thinking different, and that's the purpose of why it was such a powerful teaching device, to help people to start thinking differently and so forth. So, Cameron, you want to take from here?
Yeah, and real quickly, I'll say it looks like Jonathan Bond said, "Can you help those who may be new to understand how we know the KJV is not wrong, but rather limited or imprecise, a limited or imprecise translation?" And I would say, yeah, this is kind of what Rodolfo and Rachel are describing here. Rodolfo's point that he just made, which I thought was really profound, is when the King James Version was written, it was written by Gentiles with a Gentile mentality, right? And that leaks through or bleeds through into the way it gets translated. It's like Pierre said, it flattens the meaning, right? The way it gets structured, it's all kind of jumbled into one big block. And even sort of the words that are used, it doesn't capture as well the original intended meaning. Now, what you'll find is as we kind of start going through some of the tools here, if you start out with some other translations, you'll get to kind of the meaning and the heart of it quicker. And you can go back and you can read the King James and you can see, okay, I can see what this is getting at here. There are other places too where the same Hebrew word will get translated a few different ways in English in the King James. And that actually ends up being not super helpful. They would do it that way because they were just trying to be expressive and go for what sounded, nice and beautiful in English. But it actually starts to distract from and get away from the intended meaning, because we'll see, because it's poetry, the words are used very intentionally. They're placed very intentionally, and they have intentional meanings. So
yeah, next week I think Jonathan also asked if we can talk about the Dead Sea Scroll and the Masoretic text. And next week we're going to cover some of that in the historical context, also how did we got the book of Isaiah and all of the different translations that we have, and original sources too. So we will cover that. Good question though.
But you don't feel like you can't read the KJV. I'm not like totally poo-pooing it. I'll check it out and see what it has to say, because we do use it as to know what those words are too, as part of word links when we're searching in the Book of Mormon and other places. So I don't want anyone to think like it's not worth looking.
That's the word, that's the language for Doctrine and Covenants and the Book of Mormon. So if you want to do word links and see there is any words here in the Book of Mormon that is repeating from Isaiah, then yeah, King James is very handy for that. But if you want to go and try to understand the meaning of the verse, you want to explore different translations, and yeah, we will cover some of that.
Yeah, they're great resources. The site Rodolfo's putting together here, that is kind of the companion to this course, is going to be really helpful. In general, for things other than Isaiah, BibleHub.com is really helpful because you can compare several different translations all at the same time, and you can sort of see, okay, we've got like 17 people here taking a different approach to the same verse, and sometimes you can kind of triangulate on the meaning a little bit more. So leave no stone unturned, and use all of these things as tools on your tool belt, but kind of know that there is a little bit of a hierarchy in terms of what's going to capture the meaning better and probably be clearer. So, okay, so a couple of things here real quickly here before we tie off. And these are tools that you can take and you can start using them sort of right away. And we'll certainly be referring to these as we get into the text in a couple weeks. Parallelism is a huge thing. So, like Rodolfo and Rachel said, the one of the major styles in Hebrew poetry is to write with these sort of parallel lines where an idea will be stated, and then in the following line, that idea gets restated in slightly different words. Or rather, and we'll get into this in a little bit as well, the two lines that are right next to each other are just sort of companion lines, right? They're kind of playing off of each other. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, Isaiah 2:3 captures this, and we'll see it all over. Many people shall go, saying, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in his ways, that we may follow in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and from Jerusalem the word of Jehovah. There's a interesting thing that starts to happen when you look at scripture this way, when you look at Isaiah this way, and that is that you start to see within Isaiah's framework, right, within his worldview, the words that he is putting on a parallel, right, the words that he's making synonymous, they give you keys to start, using verses as kind of a Rosetta Stone to go and unlock the meanings of other things and see how verses are connected and whatnot. So, for example, from this verse, you could get an idea, okay, the mountain of Jehovah is the same thing as the house of the God of Jacob. So mountain and house, there's a relationship there symbolically. Jehovah and the God of Jacob, right? Those are synonymous. And so when those get used in other contexts, you can start to think about, all right, what's similar about these things, right? What's similar about a mountain and a house? And now that I see mountain being used in this context, uh, could I read this and could I also read in house in some sense, right? And could I get an idea um, for other meanings? That will make sense as we kind of push along here. But that's a synonymous parallel. There are a couple of other kinds. Here's just another example of a synonymous parallel. This is probably my favorite verse in all of Isaiah. Thus says my Lord Jehovah, I will, and I've got these highlighted so you can see what the parallel word or concept is. I'll lift up my hand to the nations and raise my ensign to the peoples. They will bring your sons in their bosoms and carry your daughters on their shoulders. Kings shall be your foster fathers, and queens your nursing mothers. So hopefully that highlights kind of the parallel nature of the text.
That verse is loaded, by the way. So
It is
we're
loaded.
gonna
We will
that
unpack that for weeks.
yeah, that is absolutely one of my I literally when I read the Hebrew of that, I fell out from my chair. But we will we will talk more about it when we get there.
There's a lot of chair falling that's going to be happening this year.
Yeah.
So complementary parallels are another kind that we'll see. So the idea with the synonymous parallels, it's the same exact idea that's being conveyed in different words, right? So you're getting now a new keyword that means the exact same, and those are linked. When it's complementary, this is an idea that the lines aren't exactly the same, but they have a relationship. So for example, Isaiah 56:1, my salvation will soon come when my righteousness is revealed. Um, and the way that these words get used is very intentional, and you'll see this show up in other places in Isaiah. What's being indicated here is that righteousness is a forerunner to salvation. The same way that um, John the Baptist is a forerunner to Jesus, right? There's a similar sort of pattern or relationship going on there. So righteousness precedes salvation. That's what we're reading. And so these are complementary in that they're related to each other. You can kind of define the meaning of the one or the other based on the way they're paralleled. Isaiah 51:5, my righteousness shall be at hand, and my salvation proceed. My arms shall judge the peoples. The isles anticipate me, awaiting my arm. You'll see this a lot as well as we go through that the Lord has two arms in the book of Isaiah: righteousness, the forerunner, and salvation. And so this is just an example of the way that those things get illustrated in parallelism. And then the last kind is antithetical parallels. So this is when verses are set up, lines are set up, but there's a contrast, right? So we can see this a little bit here in the structure. Arise, shine, your light has dawned. The glory of Jehovah has risen upon you. Although darkness covers the earth, a thick mist the peoples, right? So there's a contrast there. Upon you, Jehovah will shine. Over you, his glory will be visible.
Awesome.
A good one.
Yeah, and this is kind of a summary of this section is the anatomy of a Hebrew verse. And so you have, this is Isaiah 8:8. So instead of the Lord just saying, somebody mentioned here, let me go back to Mike. He mentioned that Hebrew poetry is conceptual parallelism rather than rhyming as in English. Yeah, there is some tempo in some of the verses for sure. There is more sound in Hebrew, but yeah, it's more about the context of what the Isaiah is trying to say. But for example, here, instead of just saying, I will invade your land with this foreign nation, the language is going to be, I will pour out into Judah. So, okay, you start thinking, as we are Judah, we are the people, swirling as a sweeping over it. So now it's the idea of pour out, swirling, sweeping. So you start thinking, okay, this is like a flood that's coming. And then it gets closer to closer. So there is a drama that you are putting yourself into it, reaching up to the neck. And then spreading streams will cover your entire land. So, oh, Emmanuel. So a couple of things here is that you have the imagery as a chaos motif. You have the temporal fulfillment, which was the historical Assyrian invasion. They destroyed most of Judea. 46 cities of Judah were destroyed except Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the neck, but also personally that represents the holy place. So that, yeah, I will reach your neck. Now also the neck and Jewish culture was a symbolism of parallelism, that purification, for people to be purified when they came to the usually Passover feast. People came from the pilgrims that before going to the temple, they needed to go to this pool and enter until the neck. That was considered purification for them. And then we have that although it's reaching the neck, we have a hyperbole there. This is a literary device that they were saying your entire land to just put emphasis or exaggeration, but it's not really the entire land because it reaches the neck, right? And then we have the promise of Emmanuel, which was given in Isaiah chapter 7, that it means God is with us. So despite this terrible imagery, there is hope that if we are with the Lord, He is with us, then we will be, there is hope, there is deliverance, and so forth. So that's to give you an idea of how you can now take all of this and apply it to our own lives. Also, how this will play in the end time, because what has been shall be. So, Rachel, you wanna?
Yeah. Are we okay on time? 8:44. Is everyone okay?
Yeah, let's call it 15 minutes and.
Okay. All right. So, this is something I was familiar with, but I hadn't looked into, and so I looked into this last week. And the term pardes or pardes, or there's many different ways of saying it. I'm just going to tell you guys about it. So in Farsi or Persian, it means paradise or heavenly garden. And or if you go back farther, it means walled garden or enclosure, and it has the idea of something, a wall being around. So it's like perfect, enclosed, or a metaphor for a heavenly garden. But in the Hebrew, the word means orchard or garden, and it refers to like a lush area that has fruit trees and pretty much where you want to go hang out. So in Song of Songs, here's an example in 4:13. It says, "Your plants are an orchard, pardes, of pomegranates with choice fruits, with camphor and spikenard." Okay, so there's just an example of it. But this is terms been used to, we'll go to the next slide, to describe this little 4-part series of how to look at scripture.
And this is called, this is the idea of exegesis. It's Hebrew exegesis, and exegesis is interpretation of a text. So how we can take a text and then convey meaning. And yeah, and so the Hebrews had a way that they went to all of these. This is an acronym for that. Sorry, Rachel, keep going.
No, you're totally fine. You could keep going. So yeah, just as Rodolfo said. So the acronym PRDS, which Peshat, Remez, Darash. So those are like the Hebrew words. I'm probably butchering them. I'm sorry. But so in essence, it's just showing you each one's going to represent a layer to unpeel that will kind of draw back everything to show, in essence, what's going on in the secret garden, maybe. You can go to the next one. If you guys want to say anything.
Yeah,
No.
I mean, I think the big idea is that there are layers, to these things. There is like what you see on the surface, and you can go, like we'll get into in just a second here. There's sometimes more than meets the eye. Sometimes, always.
Always, right? Always. And the thing that astounds me is, how did I miss this before? How did I miss this? I mean, it happens every time where I'm like, oh, I didn't see this before. That's what's so fun. Okay, so Peshat is like okay, I tried to, because all these meant garden or orchard and had this idea, I decided to relate them to different aspects of being first outside of the garden where you're looking at the wall and it's just a literal wall, right? Straightforward, literal, surface meaning. You're just kind of reading the text for as it is and you see it as a wall. But then the next layer, remez, would be something that it's hinting at more. So if you're standing outside a secret garden, you're looking at a wall, you might actually notice there's a doorway there. And so you would identify in this layer, beyond that literal sense, you kind of look at some of the words, maybe a little bit start word searching things, and you kind of see that it's hinting at more that's happening there. Then the next one, Drosh, would be like entering that door and you start the pathway through the garden. And you get to compare different interpretations. You get to see where these contexts are in different verses throughout other scriptures. And you're going to search, kind of explore more like you would in the garden. And you get to see all the different things. And then the last one, Sod, which is more like the secret or the hidden meaning. I was relating it to like being up close to like a piece of fruit or a tree. You get to really be right there with it and know what's happening. There were two verses, Deuteronomy and Psalms, that I just came across that I thought were really great for this. I'll just read it really quick in relation to secret. Deuteronomy 29 says, "The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." And then, excuse me, sorry. In Psalms, the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant. So there are some ideas with secrets and mysteries, and sometimes I know people get irritated for those who are seeking or searching the mysteries, but I just feel like it's a natural part of the process. And when you want to know, you want to know. And it's not so much that it's about some secret mystical thing. I never started with that as my intention. You just started wanting to know what the Lord had to say. But then you kind of arrive at these, I don't know, really beautiful meanings and things that secrets that you didn't know were there. So that's the process.
And I love you said that mysteries are not necessarily locating call of. We always use that example, but more than really that relationship with the Lord when He can help you to make sense of everything, and it's an experiential event. And you see the greater things really unfolding, which is your capacity for understanding and view of things, right? You get great views of the gospel and how really everything makes sense. So yeah, those are, and of course it comes with knowledge and sometimes understanding concepts, and all of that comes into place. But I love how you put it there as the idea of tasting, which is the similar idea in Alma 32, right? The word actually begins as a seed and then grows into a tree that we can partake, which actually grow in us, and all of that.
Love that. So Rodolfo, do you want to go over this one, or do you want?
Yeah. So you have the
Sorry, I didn't highlight it very good.
yeah, and one thing on the mysteries too, and the idea of unfolding from last week. I forgot to mention that the principle of unfolding is expressly given in the revelations that Joseph Smith received. He asked usually a question about a verse in the Bible, not all of them, but most of our amazing sections like 76 degrees of glory. That you see how in one verse you have that everything was hidden or concealed, and then it was an unfolding of all of that verse and so forth. So that's kind of illustrate the principle. And from Second Nephi 28, right? So let's see. So
Also, if you look at the word unfolding, I think throughout the Book of Mormon, it has a very revelatory
yeah,
concept behind it. It definitely links to that theme. Sorry.
yeah. So this is actually I'm reading it and I thought, oh, this is Second Nephi 29, right? I want to make sure it's not 28.
Maybe I have it wrong.
Yeah, that's 29.
I was thinking Isaiah 28.
Yeah. That's okay. That's my mind. That's what my mind. Like
Well, see, I'm glad that
I
you have
thought
something.
28, and then I started reading. This is not 28. Yeah, that's 29. So yeah,
Sorry, guys.
yeah, woe be unto him that said we have received, and we need no more, and find woe unto all those who tremble and are angry because of the truth of God. For behold, he that is built upon the rock receive it with gladness, and he that is built upon the sandy foundation tremble lest he shall fall. And one thing that I really also was amazing for me to read, and I said 29, we have that the Lord will increase the lame, or people who have no knowledge will receive more knowledge, and so forth, which is the idea where this passages section Second Nephi, Second Nephi 27 and 28 come from. But the word for more, actually the Hebrew word for Joseph, is to add, to increase, to give more. And I think there is a fun meaning there, because Joseph came with more, right? And people who reject Joseph, actually, they say no more, we have enough. So it's a very fun playing words in Hebrew when you read that. And to me, Nephi knew that. I think that's why he's playing so much also in 28, right? Those who say we have enough, no more, they shall be taken, even what they received. So the next verse, woe be unto him that shall say, we have received the word of God. We need no more of the word of God, for we have enough. For behold, thus said the Lord God, I will give unto the children of men line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. Sorry, this is 28. That's my bad. And blessed are those who hearken unto my precepts and lend an ear unto my counsels, for they shall learn wisdom. For unto him that receiveth, I will give more. And from them that shall say, we have enough, from them shall be taken away even that which they have. So one thing that we talked about it before is that is line upon line a good thing or not? And I think as a starting point, for sure you want to receive line upon line, that is precept upon precept, linear growth. But then you have here a little and there a little, and to me that is the transition from start making connections. And because then blessed are those who hearken unto my precepts and lend an ear to my counsel, for they shall learn wisdom. And to me, that's the idea of knowledge versus wisdom, right? Start making these connections and application. And when we get to that point of learning wisdom, is when we are showing the Lord we are actually receiving, and then we can receive more. And from them that shall say, we have enough, from them shall be taken away even that which they have. Curses he that putteth his trust in men, or maketh flesh his arm, or shall hearken unto the precepts of men, save that precepts shall be given by the power of the Holy Ghost.
Okay. Okay, so divine revelation and literary skill. Isaiah's prophecies stem from divine revelation, where God grants him insight into all things, which we mentioned that phrase before. This knowledge is conveyed through Isaiah's extraordinary literary skills, which you guys are going to be seeing so much more this year. So they conceal and reveal his apocalyptic message. His writings depict the end from the beginning and adhere to patterns and parameters of apocalyptic literature. Now you have to remember, because he's seen the end from the beginning, he also has been given a standard and rules and regulations with which he is able to share his message. You can't just outright say it, right? It has to be through this filter of poetry to be able to decipher it. So these literary devices, there's so many of them. There's a couple here. I just talked about metaphor, symbolism, making these other connections. These are the things that help to reveal some of the deeper meanings. Okay, so I love metaphor. I've just read a book about it this last year, and so that's why I kind of chose this topic. But the power of metaphor. The metaphors as literary devices describe one thing in terms of another. This is a quote by James Greery, and he wrote, actually made a note, so I can tell you guys what book he did. I have two authors on here. So his quote is, any metaphor is comprehensible only to the extent that the domains from which it is drawn are familiar. So in relation to understanding like the historical background and the culture and the context of Isaiah's time and his writings, also with the traditions, the customs of people at that time and their neighbors, you have to understand that in order to be able to make a little bit more sense of his metaphors and his message. So once we become kind of familiar with the history of those things, and I would say also it would include mythology and some of these other stories in this, then it allows you to move beyond some of these basic first layer meanings and kind of see what he's pointing at. So let's see. So there is a creative aspect that I've noticed that happens with this, and I would say it's rooted in this idea of pattern recognition where and able to see and connect some things and bring them together. I gave, let's see, two examples here of, let's see, in Isaiah 33:11, here's a metaphor. You shall conceive chaff and give birth to straw. My breath shall consume you in fire. So we've got conceiving chaff and giving birth to straw. So we've got like pregnancy and conception also with farming together there, you know? So the thing about Isaiah that's super cool is he does these like rapid fire metaphors and he mixes them and he'll throw multiple things together at once, but it gives you such an amazing image that's going on there. It's like, whoa. So then the other one's from Isaiah 8. Therefore, and so this one has to do with mythology a little bit. Will my Lord cause to come up over them the great and mighty waters of the river, the king of Assyria in all his glory. He will rise up over his channels and overflow all his banks. He will sweep into Judea like a flood. So if you're familiar with ancient Near Eastern mythology, there is a whole Baal story that kind of is in parallel with what you see in Isaiah. So some of those things will really help you to understand that the sea and the river is actually a chaos motif, and it represents someone who is a type of the king of Assyria, but in an end time context. And so anytime you see the water in that regard, it represents this person. But yeah, lots of mythology going on there. You guys want to add anything?
No, that metaphors is to bridge the gap between the greater things or higher realities versus what we're familiar with, but it's always to help us to go to behind the meaning. So it's not just to give us a simplified version of something more than bridge the gap.
Yeah. This image is what's going on in my brain and why it's really hard for me to sometimes explain what's happening. It's like connecting all these points. I love this picture. So this is Maria Popova. She has a blog called, it used to be called Brain Pickings. Now it's called The Marginalian. And she has beautiful writing and she quotes many authors that write really well. And I've always really liked well-written things. So this is from her. While this familiarity might be the foot in the door of understanding, a great metaphor is also an original one, thus forming new, uncommon associations of common elements rather than relying merely on the familiar ones. A beautiful manifestation of combinatorial creativity at play, and therein lies the magic. So it's good to become familiar with these terms so that you understand what's going on, but then there's this point where once you get into the familiarity, then you can move beyond it and start connecting things that you really hadn't thought of before. It's like a whole nother layer to it. This one's from Daniel Bohr. He's a scientist from Cambridge, neuroscientist. Our capacity for pattern recognition is the very source of human creativity. So this creativity, it ties us back to what I thought was the beginning of Genesis, where you see God's power manifest and his ability to create order out of chaos. And I kept thinking that creativity is a really important aspect of our lives. We each have it. And to some degree, I often hear people say, oh, I'm not creative. But creativity, it's not just about art or painting or drawing. You can have this amazing analytical creativity, because once everything's tied to the spirit, it really catapults it further and beyond to a creativity that you hadn't maybe thought of before. So to recognize these patterns and make connections throughout the scriptures, it brings a beautiful order to things and enlightens the eyes of understanding. This picture too could also represent word links. We didn't talk about this in other places, but word links they can either be a word that you're connecting and looking throughout the scriptures, or they can have to do with an idea or theme or topic that connects, and you'll just see how they all over the place, and you just start to build a definition of whatever it is you're searching. So, do you guys have anything to say on that?
No, that's the idea of a hyperlink. Well, the scriptures are the most hyperlink book. You can just click on one and then takes you to another one, and it builds itself from hyperlinks. So yeah, there is this image about how
another term you could use, and I would say,
go for it.
Yeah, don't you think, like, sometimes I will start with I have to write down my starting verse and word or what I was looking at, because I could be 10 times into it and you forget where did I start? What was I originally searching? Because you just get all over the place and just keeps expanding, like that picture. Okay, so this kind of came to me today about this quote. I'll read the quote and then I'll explain where I went with it. This is from Daniel Bohr too. The process of combining more primitive pieces of information to create something more meaningful is a crucial aspect both of learning and of consciousness, and is one of the defining features of human experience. Once we have reached adulthood, we have decades of intensive learning behind us, where the discovery of thousands of useful combinations of features, as well as combinations of combinations, and so on, has collectively generated an amazingly rich hierarchical model of the world. Inside us is also written a multitude of many strategies about how to direct our attention in order to maximize further learning. We can allow our attention to roam anywhere around us and glean interesting new clues about any facet of our local environment, to compare and potentially add to our extensive internal model. So I just love this. But one of the things, I was reading a book this year, my friend Megan had turned me on to this author, Ian McGilchrist, and it's all about the brain, and it's called The Master and the Emissary. And so if anyone has read that, it's really good. If not, it's great. But he talks about your attention, and there's a whole aspect about directing your attention in certain ways, which I think maybe we'll touch on when we get there, and when it's applicable to scriptures, just because we're short on time now. But so let me hop to when I saw this, inside us is also written, I immediately thought of these verses, starting with Moses 6:61, about how there is are thinking about the record of being written in your heart, which is in Jeremiah, but this record that's actually in, you could say, what does he say? Let me read the scripture because I don't have it memorized like Rodolfo does.
The record of heaven.
Yeah, the record of heaven. Maybe I don't have it written down here somewhere. Let's see.
Yeah, it's given to abide in you, the comforter.
Yeah, to abide in you. Yeah, the record of heaven, right? Okay,
the record
so
of heaven, yeah.
abide in you. And then in Jeremiah, the Lord's, he writes it in your heart. And Isaiah 51. Gosh, I don't have, oh, I do have, okay. I do have these, sorry. Totally didn't have my glasses on, I can't see. Okay, so Jeremiah was, but this shall be a covenant, shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. And after those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. Isaiah 51:7, hear me, you who know righteousness, O people, in whose heart is my law. And then Proverbs, my son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee. Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them about the table of thine heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. So in relation to this creativity and the spirit teaching you and all these things, comes this aspect and connection with things being written in our hearts. And I kind of just thought it was fun to pull that there.
Awesome. So we are kind of, how much do we have?
I don't know, maybe we should end already after.
Yeah,
What is there left? Is this it?
there are two left.
Okay, how about I even power through? Okay, expanding our understanding. This is it. Some of our greatest insights can be gleaned from moving up another level and noticing that certain patterns relate to others, which on first blush may appear entirely interconnected. Spotting patterns of patterns, which is what analogies essentially are. Just one thing, I'll just say that this system expands exponentially and feeds on itself. Rodolfo mentioned like that feedback loop that he had before, and I would say this just keeps building and building and expanding.
And I really thought the idea of a brain and the paradigms that we have as these neuro connections of precepts, and how I believe there is something happening in the brain, and I'm not an expert to speak about, but when you start learning this truth, actually you break those, to me, the idea of chains, right? There is a similar relationship with chains and neuro connections to really make space to connect reality and start understanding truth and all of that.
Yeah. Okay, so the capacity for spiritual light. I was thinking this creativity relates to that and your ability to be able to receive and interact with spiritual light. This is a quote from Daniel Borg. Consciousness and chunking, which I won't talk about chunking now, but it's just putting these pieces together, allow us to turn the dull sludge of independent episodes in our lives into a shimmering dense web interlinked by all the myriad patterns we spot. It becomes a positive feedback loop, making the detection of new connections even easier, and creates a domain ripe for understanding how things actually work, reaching that supremely powerful realm of discerning the mechanism of things. At the same time, our memory system becomes far more efficient, effective, and intelligent than it could ever be without such refined methods to extract useful structure from raw data. So I just kept thinking about that word intelligent in relation to this, and these three places in D and C where we've got that principle of intelligence, whatever level of that we attain rises with us. And that intelligence is the light of truth, and the glory of God is intelligence, light, and truth. And then in 88, that intelligence cleaves to intelligence. So
wonderful. Yeah, your capacity increases. Just Smith said that our spirits are subject to enlargement, so that's subject to receive, and the way they enlarge and they grow is through that receiving intelligence, light, and truth, and all of that. So that's the last one.
That's it, I think. Are we done? Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Closing remarks, Cameron. Maybe we give you the mic.
No, I don't know that I have anything. There's some great books out there. And I know that we'll provide some more resources on this as we go along. But yeah, in terms of summing it up, I don't know that I have anything more to add. So
Yeah. Well, again, so that was wonderful. And that, Rachel, and seeing how there is this change that can really happen. And more than anything, these tools are to help you to just look things differently and do your own learning and learn from yourself, from the Lord, and not trust the arm of flesh and start growing in that way. And it's a fun journey, but we don't expect to really you to become an expert into literary devices and all of that. I think that's not the purpose. Although it's fun, but it's all about your relationship with the Lord. And that next week we're gonna cover the historical context of Isaiah, some maybe fun things about Isaiah, about how do we got the book of Isaiah, what is in the book as a high view overview, and then we're gonna jump into chapter 1 after. So, well, thank you guys for coming in, and those who are watching the recordings, we love you too. And Cameron, Rachel, you are awesome. Thank you so much.
thank you guys. Yeah, and those of you watching, let us know what you think in the chat here. If you've got leftover questions or anything like that, then shoot those here, and I'll stick around for a minute and maybe answer some of those if I can.
Awesome. I think after we end, it's gonna change to the comment
Does it
section.
go to comments? Okay.
Yeah, go to the comment section. Yeah.